Welcome to the 13th in our series of podcasts. The topic of this podcast is lockdowns, art, cooking and sin. I'm very happy to be joined in this latest podcast by Encephalitis Ambassador and multi-talented Mathew Bose. Mathew is an actor, an artist, a nutritionist, a life coach, an excellent cook, and as I recently discovered, the proud owner now of an allotment. He's also been an ambassador with the Encephalitis Society for 14 years, and he was our first ambassador. So he sort of feels really precious to me. It's like getting your first toy. Personally speaking, his support and guidance has meant the world to me, especially throughout those really early years when we were a much younger charity and we were beginning to deal with things like the press and the media. In addition, and perhaps more importantly, I'm really delighted actually to be able to call him my friend as well after all this time. He is annoyingly handsome and youthful, and to this day still refuses to confirm that he is hiding a painting in his attic of Dorian Gray. So Mathew, welcome.
Oh, thank you. What a lovely introduction. If only any of that were true, except for the friendship part, of course, that is true. But hello, and thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Look, it feels like years ago when we were at last in a room together. I know it hasn't been that long, but how have you been during this really kind of uncertain time?
It has been a roller coaster, hasn't it, for everyone? I think it's interesting for someone like me. I'm not one for normally discussing how I feel publicly, so which I don't think is a good trait. I'm not saying that's a good thing. So it's been quite good for me actually that this time I've been forced into an arena where I've had to say actually I'm not doing so well because the business is all collapsed. We have a guest house which obviously went to the wall. The acting profession dried up. Lots of things came to a complete standstill. And at the beginning, I just thought it was a couple of weeks, months, or whatever, because no one knew, did we? And then as the months rolled on, started to sell everything that we had. Even my body, not my body, actually, nobody wants that. But we just got to a point where we were just thinking, this is quite serious. And I began to get an anxiety that I couldn't shift. I sort of woke up with it. And, it was quite stressful. But, I always think that you've got to turn these things around. I think the great thing that humans can do is we process and we adapt and we survive. And I think that's pretty much been my goal throughout this entire last year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, mental health is something that has become, I think, very important to society as a whole as a result of this pandemic. I guess, jumping straight in, really, there might be some listeners who really identify with what you've just said. Do you have any tips on improving mental health? What's one piece of advice that maybe comes to mind for you?
Well, I think it was, for me, it became about localizing my panic, if you know what I mean. I had to come to a stage where I realized that I couldn't do anything about the global issue. And global responsibility is very weighty. I think it's in itself, it brings huge stress because if you look at all the terrible things that are happening in the world, it's easy to be overwhelmed, I think, and just become completely almost desensitized to it, almost actually. So I made everything very personal. I thought I think as a generation, perhaps, we were brought up, mustn't be selfish, you shouldn't think about yourself. But looking out for number one, as it were, has in a proactive, positive way for my mental health has become the key thing. So I became micro-ambitious. I would just wake up and think, right, I'm going to do whatever this thing is I'm doing, maybe make a cake, but I'm going to make the most spectacular cake I can personally make in this moment. And then I'm going to move on to the next moment. And then I'm going to move on to the next thing and tickle everything else along, obviously, because one has to pay bills and the rest of it. But I found structuring it that way much easier for me to cope because as it all comes at you so fast, I just became overwhelmed. I just thought, I'm just going to lie on my bed. I'm not going to get up. And there were days when I thought, I can't get up. I just can't. I was just doing this sort of terrible kind of anxiety thing. And then I just think, no, just do one thing. Just get up and be glad that you've got up. Here I am, and it sounds trite perhaps, but I think that gratitude for those moments, really moment to moment to moment, is what got me through.
Oh, that's amazing. I know, from knowing you that you have a background also as a fully qualified life coach. Has that helped you maintain a positive outlook during the drudgery of the last year in any way?
I suppose the reason I did the life coaching and the nutrition courses and studied all those things and have continued to was not because I wanted to be a life coach or a nutritionist, because I don't, to be honest. But I just thought it would enhance my own life, my own understanding of myself. I always think that self-awareness is the greatest gift we can give ourselves. And I think constantly learning and being aware of what's happening within myself, trying to understand these complexities of being human, is actually a wonderful journey to go on, a lifelong one. And one of the things about life coaching that I've always thought was interesting, that it's about permission. And it's, in a sense, the thing I take from that, it was giving myself permission to fail, I suppose, in the sense of I felt I should be able to cope. Everybody else was making sourdough bread and learning a language and going to the gym, and they were all sorts of running marathons, being amazing. And I just wanted to lie face down on the floor like a puppy, just lie there until it was all over, and I thought, oh, I'm failing, and here I am, this person. I think that often people look at me and think, oh, Mathew's doing all this and he's got all this going on and all the rest of it. I mean, one's perception of how other people see you, of course, is so through it's all through a prism, isn't it? But I realized that it was giving myself permission, I suppose, to be okay with struggle, with processing. And that permission, actually, just on a general basis, has been hugely useful to me, and I take it forward. And a lot of people I've talked to, who I realize, when you start saying to people, are you okay? And you realize they're not, and they've been hiding, or they're trying to put, plaster over the cracks. Talk about that permission, I suppose, and not just as a buzzword, but properly understanding what that means and how you come to terms with it and process it and allow yourself the journey, allow the processing. And I think, honestly, that if the only thing that anybody does during the entire pandemic is process and understand what's happening to them and survive it, then they've achieved everything. And that, to me, is so important, because all the sourdough bread in the world and all the languages in the world won't give you, if that is something that works for you, that's great. But to me, it was transference. I needed to deal with the fact that I had an internal dialogue of anxiety constantly, that I couldn't then go forwards. I was sort of stuck in this spiral of fear. And so I think that's the processing and the acknowledgement and the allowing, the permission has been so vital for me.
Yeah, I think those are such important points. And I recently watched the Roman Kemp documentary about young male suicides. And what I took away from that, there's always so much information in these things, but my takeaway was what they called the rule of two. When you ask someone, are you okay? And of course, people go, yeah, I'm fine. Go, no, are you okay? And I took that away, and actually it's already had a bit of an impact, because we do just fluff off whether we're okay. And I think, we've learned a lot. So that really resonates with me, what you said.
It's become a thing, though, hasn't it? That people say, you're all right, and it's not intended as an actual question, is it? And I think that often people just say it as, and then if someone says, well, actually, I'm feeling a bit this, then some people are like, oh, yikes, I wish I never said that. But I think what's happened now is that people have realized that those tiny words, all those things that we just say now that have become, are actually really, really important. And taking in someone's face and seeing how they're dressed. And, when I check in on my mother to make sure that she's, was she wearing that when I saw her last, and has she eaten, just doing little checks without making her feel that I'm watching her or judging or anything like that, which would be horrific. And of course I'm not doing that, but I need to know, because the safeguarding the people around me, that's why I say locally. So I've concentrated on that, on the family and friends and anyone else I know. But of course, with social media, you end up being slightly sort of involved in other people's, and because people respond to my Instagram, especially, quite beautiful, lovely, really lovely messages, I feel a connection with those people. And I feel just those little tiny moments just keep people just jogged along a bit, just keep everyone just lifted up, just off bumping on the floor. And that's so important. And I'm happy and I'm delighted and honored to be part of that.
Yeah, no, great words. I'm curious about something now. I noticed during the pandemic that you started using your Indian name, Rajat, on your online profiles, because you were talking about Instagram there. And I wondered, what brought that to be? Was it something related to the pandemic or something that you were going to do anyway?
Well, it's always been something in the background, because Rajat is one of my proper name, if you like. But I think in the world at the moment at large, but especially in the acting industry, there is a movement at the moment for people to reclaim things that were taken away from them in there. And in my case, when I was a model, being called Rajat was because it was exotic, and you were sort of brown and nobody could quite work out where you were from, and sort of that sort of helped modeling. But with acting, it was the opposite, because nobody could work out where you were from. You didn't seem particularly English, but you sound English. Where are you from? And all this box ticking had to go on, and still, unfortunately, does. And the labels were important. And so Mathew worked better for that, because there were Rajat would only be put up for very much ethnic parts, which in those days there were very few of. We're not talking that long ago either, but it became a thing that a lot of people were reclaiming it and using both, or calling themselves that. And I was a bit because I feel in two minds about it, to be honest, because Mathew has achieved quite a lot of things as Mathew in that acting profession. But I also see that there are people, this is the flip side of it, who are, producers or people who network people who make these decisions, that just run down a list of things and see a name and a face and think, oh, that person looks Indian, or they look this, they sound it. But Mathew doesn't look Indian, so they wouldn't consider me. So it was an experiment really at first. And the pandemic in a way seemed like the best time to try that, because people were at home a lot more. There was a lot more sort of people were much more aware of what was going on, I suppose, because they were constantly in this different cycle. They weren't all at work in their own little silos. They were suddenly, things were being broken and reset in a different way. And I felt it would be interesting just to trial it on social media to see if anyone noticed or said anything. And the bizarre thing is, pretty much nobody said anything, but unless I mentioned it. And then you realize that people are nervous to say, oh, what's that about? And I think that's part of the reason it's been healthy, actually, because it's breaking down some of that barrier, because I am both of those things. I'm all of those things. I am Rajat, I'm also Mathew, I'm lots of other things. It's sort of, the name in itself shouldn't really mean anything. But unfortunately, in my industry at the moment, it does. So I'm rolling with it at the moment to try to re-educate, shall we say.
Oh, I can feel another podcast coming on when you're experimenting a bit further along, perhaps. But you talked about your social media, and obviously we follow each other on Instagram, although you are much better at it than I am. I'm horribly rubbish on Instagram and rarely ever do anything. And on your Instagram page, you have quite a lot of artwork. And I was wondering, because I've seen your artwork. I mean, you do some amazing, amazing stuff. And is it something that you've pursued since childhood, or is it something you developed as an adult? What's the story behind it?
I've always been a very visual person. I'm interested. I think humans are visual, actually, and I think it's an awful criminal shame that for a lot of younger people, it's drummed out of them because they're deemed not artistic or whatever. And I just think that's shocking, but that is another podcast. I was given some color pencils, I think, when I was very young from a jumble sale or something. And I sort of scratched, I had bits of paper. I was very interested in collage when I was younger. And I was obsessed with David Sylvian from the band Japan. And so I had these color pencils. So I decided to do a drawing plus collage, and I'm making it sound creepy now, of David Sylvian. And it turned out quite well. And then I started becoming more interested in art, actually. And my aunt is actually quite an accomplished oil painter. So she encouraged me, seeing that I was doing that. And I sort of just followed my own path. I did it at A level, but I really, really disliked that, because it was very set and regimented, and you had to draw sort of a cyclamen on a mirror or something, which I couldn't see the point of. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to discover the artistic element of me, see what that was, and I think that's the problem, is that people are always told they have to do it a certain way, but I don't think anything you create is art to me. So I've always loved it. So I've always had it tickling along in the background, I suppose, is how I look at it. And I do find it quite therapeutic, and I can lose myself in those, and I only use color pencils really, and I only really do dogs, to be honest, now. So because I find that very therapeutic, just the drawing every individual hair and the eyes and the expressions are so important to me, and I just love to see it come alive on the page. And sometimes it's very kind of you to say that they are, but sometimes they're less successful than others. But it's really, I don't really do it for other people, and that's a very important lesson I learned with it, that or anytime I've created anything, really, I'm not doing it for someone else, I'm doing it for me. So I don't do commissions, for instance, which people find sort of bizarre. So they say, why aren't you doing this as another stream of income? But I just don't like the pressure. I don't want somebody else saying, making suggestions. No, I don't like your suggestions. I want to do it this way. I'm doing it. So perhaps I'm just not cut out to be a commercial artist.
Yeah, well, you said you do mainly dogs now. Of course, I've noticed over time it has been mainly animals. I mean, I remember many years ago. Do you remember Sally?
Yes.
Was she a gorilla? No, she wasn't a gorilla.
No, the chimpanzee.
Chimpanzee, that's yes, right. Yes. I remember her. I think that got auctioned off somewhere. I think.
Yes, to the Monkey World, the Dorset Monkey Rescue World. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a big print of it on my wall, actually, in the guest house, and it's on a dead end corridor. When you turn the corner, it's there. It's huge, and so people. But I find her sort of benevolence in her stare, and of course she's the most incredible chimpanzee. She's the sort of female leader of the pack, and she's just incredible. And I think that's one of the most successful portraits I've ever done, actually. But I almost feel it was sort of otherworldly when that happened, and sometimes I try to create that differently, but I don't really have a technique. I think that's my problem. I'm not really trained. I just sort of do it. I have an idea in my head of what it should look like, what I want it to look like, rather, and I sort of work backwards from there. It's another life coaching thing. You visualize yourself here, and then you work backwards to how do you get there. So I kind of do that really with it. And sometimes I try stuff, and I never experiment and do sketchbooks and stuff like proper artists. I just sort of chuck it down, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, well, I'm not selling it, and I always say to people, you can have it if you want, but you don't have to. But so far, no one said, no, thank you.
No, well, I encourage anybody to go and look at Mathew's Instagram page, which has got some of his amazing art on. Dogs. I think there's been the odd cat or two over the years. A pig recently, yes. Maybe a little pig recently.
Oh, pigs, yes. There's a pig.
Yeah, you won't be disappointed, people. One of the things to come out of the pandemic was a project that you started on, Operation Good Life.
Yes.
So what can you tell me about this? And in particular, what was the catalyst for Operation Good Life? Which you can all follow on Instagram as well, by the way. I think that even has its own Instagram page.
It does indeed, Operation Good Life. It's linked from my Mathew Bose one as well. It really, I'm a city boy, really, but I'm fascinated by nature. I 100% bow down to nature. To me, nature rules completely. I don't try in any way or shape or form to think that I could, ever get one up on nature. So I'm sort of interested in it, but slightly scared of it at times. But because I've been associated through partner with farming and various things, I think that I've learned a whole new admiration for it on a different level now. And this piece of rough land came up for sale and nobody wanted it. And I'm fascinated with rewilding, and I really want to plant more trees, and I love bumblebees, for instance. And so out of this rather prosaic, a bit sort of, you could argue a slightly sort of middle-class naffness of thinking, I want to pay for the world. I actually started planting these bits and pieces, and then realized that actually this was something I could really get behind and learn something, actually. And I don't believe in boredom. I think only boring people are bored. So I think you've got to go out and, all this incredible, staggering world is around us. And I thought, during this awful time, and with no money and everything going to sort of hell in a handbag, I thought, well, this is something I can do. And actually I contacted the Woodland Trust, and they very kindly immediately got behind it and gave me a huge amount of hedge to plant, because I wanted to re-put in hedges and trees. I planted about 3,500 plants so far. And so there's part of it's about 40 acres, and part of it is sort of working fields, which now have sheep on them, rather naughty sheep that keep escaping. And they're not my sheep, but they are so naughty. And the other bit, though, is sort of I'm rewilding and I'm planting some bigger trees now. And friends have come and planted trees, and which is lovely, or given me some donation to do so. And I'm trying to now create an allotment, which is something I've never done in my life, and grow a vegetable. But I'm not sure how successful that's been so far.
Have there been any really funny moments or any disasters?
Well, there's been lots of disasters. I mean, because the thing is, you're up against weather and nature, so what I was unaware of is just, you think, oh, look at those hares and deer, aren't they cute, until they destroy everything. The deer especially, they just literally shred everything. So you have to put protectors on stuff. So at first we put all these wonderful saplings in, and then they were just, with the weather, it was really hot last year in the April, about this time, where was it, about sort of springtime, and then it rained awfully, and it was just, the weather was terrible, and the Christmas had been really bad when we had to plant these things that were given to us. So I thought, and then everything died. The entire 400 meters of hedges, it all had these lovely little hawthorn leaves on, died. And I thought, oh, I've just ruined this whole thing. And I was absolutely, but it turns out nature, you see, is so clever. All nature went, it's really hot, there's no water. So it just killed off the top of the thing and went down roots to find water. And then this year they've all come back, so there's a lesson to be learned there, isn't there?
Wow. You'll be talking to my husband Tony. He used to be a landscape gardener at one point.
Yes.
So you guys are going to have to connect. So in addition to, and I think maybe it's probably connected in some way, you can't fail to notice from your Instagram page that you're a really keen cook. I mean, some of the stuff looks so delicious. And I know you're interested in nutrition generally, but what is it about food and cooking and nutrition that inspires you?
The thing is, I'm not really interested in cooking, actually. I'm interested in eating. And I think that's a very important difference. So, and because I want to eat nice things and different things, and I have to make them. So, that's why I cook, I suppose. And I actually don't mind cooking, but it's a means to an end to me, to be honest. It's just like a stuff in my face at the end of it. That's the point. But also in amongst that, I think on a serious side, there is the fact that, I have tried to learn how I can best fuel my body. I don't follow all the rules of it, and it's a very complicated thing, but there are very well-established, long-established barriers that people have to healthy eating. And one of them is obviously just knowledge, not knowing how your body processes food, how it creates fat, how it burns fat, and all of those things that people obsess about. And but I always think it's about balance. So for me, I think, I like a drink. I'm not going to deny it, but I also think, well, if you have a drink, then drink some water, because I need the balance. If I have a cup of coffee, I always drink water to balance it out again, because there is a need there for your body to do different things, and water is very important. But also just trying to create some sort of try to create food that will be interesting too, because I think anyone who's the sort of gatekeeper of a house knows that after a while, trying to work out what you're going to have for your tea or for your dinner or whatever is exhausting. And you just think, especially if you worked all day, you just think, and then you see all these people on Instagram whipping up all this sort of extraordinary food. And I think part of the reason that I put my food on Instagram is because it's all done I have a bit more time than most people because I work from home, but I also it's not complicated. Most of it's from freezer and store cupboard. If I can't make it from things I can just pull out of those, then I'm probably not going to bother, because unless I have a day off. And I think that's the case for most people. They don't have time to make all these things from scratch. But there are lots of ways that you can make much healthier versions of the things that you like to eat, and very quickly. So it's just a knowledge thing, really. So I think there's some of that on my Instagram because of that too.
Yeah, no, I agree. When because I love cooking, and one of the things that puts me off is when you get to a recipe and you look at the picture and it looks amazing, and then you look at the ingredients and it's got a list of ingredients of like 547 things, and I just lose the will to live. I'm just like, oh no.
That's important, I think, and because when a lot of people who do their cookbooks, there are always these extravagant things you're left with, and my friend Sabrina Gayle, her books are written deliberately so that everything you can get in your local supermarket, and if it is something slightly unusual, she always puts something you could have instead. And then, because it might be a jar of preserved lemons, say, and you think, what the hell am I going to do with the rest of these? There are 10 other recipes to tell you what to do with those, and I think that's so important in recipes, because otherwise you end up with all this stuff and you just think, what am I going to do with this now, this thing of whatever it is, and I don't like all that. I don't think there's any point to it. And I don't have any snobbery I don't like snobbery in cookbooks when they say you must have fresh this and fresh that. And you think, well, yeah, if you can. But I've got frozen garlic in my freezer and I live for it. And my frozen ginger, live for it. Because if I want to whip up some Chinese food and I haven't got a piece of ginger, and it might be 3 a.m, because I'm often awake cooking early in the morning and I can't pop down to wherever. So I've got it in the freezer frozen. And I think there's any shame in that. And if anyone thinks that's shameful, well, I'm not cooking for them.
I'm completely with you. Those little blocks of frozen ginger in my freezer all the time, because who goes, well, I'm going out now and I'm just going out, and you've got to try and find a bulb of ginger somewhere, and it's just impossible sometimes. But anyway, now it's your scary question moment, maybe. It's your desert island disc style question for this podcast. Ooh. So your scenario is you are cooking for 3 dinner guests. They can be alive or dead, and we want to know, who are they and what are you going to cook for them?
Oh, good. Only 3. Literally hundreds of people. Most of the people I'd like to sit at a table with are sort of historical figures, because I'd really like to know what actually went on. I'm sort of very interested in sort of ancient civilization, so I'd love to sit with sort of Ramesses or Nefertiti or something and say, what was it really like for you, love? Especially people like Nefertiti. You think how she must have been extraordinary, and then all of that sort of Alfred the Great, people like that, people who thought that education was important and legal systems, and all that time ago, Aristotle, all these great thinkers. So I suppose I would have to pick from them, really, or someone, Elizabeth I, maybe, because she was sort of extraordinary woman, clearly. Richard III, I probably couldn't have those two at the same table, but I don't want them arguing. That would be embarrassing. But I would like to know the truth, if you could, But also some people like Alan Turing, I suppose, I'd be interested, because I'd like to say to him, it all worked out and you were brilliant. And I know, maybe he knows, I don't know what happens, but so I think it's difficult, that, isn't it? And modern people, I don't know. I mean, I'm obsessed with people like Pink and Victoria Wood and all the rest of it, but I don't know if you should ever meet your idols, really. And maybe that's a bit contentious to say, but I always think that they might just be disappointing. So I don't know. Who would it be out of those lot? I don't know. I'm going to go completely, I'm going to throw this question out and add a new twist to it and say, what I'd love to do is to have 3 people who have to cook all the time and never get cooked for, whoever they are, wherever they are in the world, and cook their absolute favorite dinner for each of them. So just for that evening or that day, they would be utterly spoiled and just sit there and gorge themselves on their favorite food and not have to lift a finger for it. That would be my dream moment.
Well, that sounds like an absolute gift, doesn't it? What a kind person you are.
Oh, well. Actually, I just think it'd be lovely, isn't it? I mean, as you say, you cook all the time. So, if people say, I don't really like to cook for you, you're such a good cook. Well, but that's not really true. I know what I like. So I make the things that I like, and then other people happen to like that often, but I'm sure not always. But if somebody else makes me beans on toast, I'm thrilled because I've not made it. It's brilliant. I've not had to think about it. I'm just sat there. I get made poached eggs on Marmite toast is the speciality of his Nibbingtons, and it pleases me so much, 1, because I love it, and 2, because I didn't have to make it.
My his nibs makes the greatest poached eggs and the greatest omelettes, but I've never had my poached eggs on Marmite toast. I'm having that on Sunday now.
Oh, it's I mean, I know the Marmite is one of those things you love or hate, but, because I love it, I just think it's just bliss. It's such a wonderful black pepper on it. Please try it.
Right.
Thank you.
So toast, bit of butter, some Marmite, poached eggs on top, and some pepper. That's it. Sunday.
Enjoy.
I
I make bread, you see, because
I'm getting a WhatsApp from me on Sunday morning now.
Well, yeah.
My Marmite poached eggs.
Perfect.
But look, we all know you for your work in theatres and in Emmerdale, but recently there's been a lot of acclaim for a new drama in which you had a role, and it was called It's a Sin. For anyone who doesn't know it, it was written by the very famous Russell T Davies, creator of Queer as Folk and former scriptwriter for Doctor Who. And It's a Sin focuses on the gay community and the rise of the AIDS crisis during the 1980s, which someone of my tender years, of course, very familiar with that period of time, and a lot of the fears and anxieties and things that circulated around that time. I was about, in the early 80s, kind of about 18. Was I 18 years old? 16? Yeah, 16, 18 years old around that time. But and I've seen the programme, and it was absolutely phenomenal. But what drew you to the role that you were offered? Tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, I mean, obviously, one has so little control over roles you're offered, but I really wanted this. And even though it was a very small role, I wanted to be part of it. And it's very important to me that the story is told properly. And I knew that Russell would do this. And I want my stepkids, to understand the impact it had on our generation and the stigma that still remains. This is ludicrous and it's embarrassing to admit, but I wore fake glasses because I'd been told that it could be transmitted by saliva. And if you got it in your eye, you could get AIDS. I mean, not just HIV, just AIDS. You just got AIDS, didn't you? That was the sort of way everyone was talking. And I was terrified. I just thought, this is this awful thing. And because there was this whole build-up, it was this gay plague, it was this human cesspit. We were given all this horrific behavior by the establishment, and the press were just awful. It became this gay plague, didn't it? Mm-hmm. I think that it's so important now that people can understand that there are a lot of people of this generation and beyond who are still living with that stigma, and they're still coming to terms with that, or they grew up in their sexual, it's like knowing that in 1967, when things were repealed legally, there were lots of men who are still alive today who all of their formative years as a gay man were in fear of committing a crime, were in secret. And then they went into an AIDS period. It's sort of, there's all these moments in history that I think it's very important for gay men especially, but not just the men, because lots of women were involved, and wonderfully, from all denominations helping and assisting and affected, that we know this history of who you are is very important. And I think in the LGBTQ plus group, it's very important for people to know their history, because all of the things that are happening now happen because these things happened before. And something that I've said previously is that for me, because I'm known for playing a gay character, I get very much sidelined now as this sort of old school gay character type. And so Mathew, Rajat, whatever I call myself, I get sidelined into that because I was very much part of that world. And I think that the fact that I was involved in the first gay marriage on primetime television, that the character played on Emmerdale broke a lot of ground that had never been seen on primetime shows before, is now almost sort of, oh, we've done all that. But it wasn't very long ago. Things sometimes move too fast. And I think it's important to revisit the history to be able to say, that's where that came from. That's how these prejudices and stigmas are still remaining because of this and because of that. And we can build a better foundation, I think, for our kids to have understanding and hopefully not repeat the things that were done to us.
Yeah. I'd heard, you tell me if it's true, but I think I probably read in an interview that it was important to Russell T Davies that he cast It's a Sin with people who were gay.
I think telling a queer story with queer actors is a very interesting and important thing to do at this stage where we are. And it's something that I sort of steer clear of this. It's a huge it's a very complicated issue. But the thing is, people say, well, you hear people say, well, actors are actors, they should play whatever, and that's usually coming from white, straight male actors who obviously have that freedom. But as I point out to them, they're the people. It's not a level playing field. They have access to everything. Because I'm now deemed to be this gay actor, I have got the fuzzy end of the lollipop. So I'm only allowed to play gay roles, apparently. So if that's the way it is, then I want access to those gay roles first. Thank you very much. But also, I think if it were a level playing field and all the people in networks and producers or whomever makes the choices, ultimately signs off on which actor plays what, don't do it with any gender prejudice, any color prejudice, any age prejudice, any of those things, any sexuality, then we'll have a level playing field, and that'll be fantastic. But until that day, if that is ever possible, another podcast, I'm sure, then we won't. And so I think it is important. And the other thing also that is always worth considering, I'm not saying it's a fact, but it's definitely worth thinking about if you're not a gay person, is that most straight people play gay roles using certain codes. There's a certain way they do it. The most extreme would be a straight man camping about, lisping and spangling about the place, and to me that's offensive and foul, even though of course those sorts of characters exist. But there's a certain code that's been used there, the shorthand, that I think is I don't like, to be honest. And so there's a shorthand that actors have to use in certain circumstances. Obviously, if you've never murdered anyone, you can't only have people who've murdered someone playing a murderer, but you have certain codes that you use to access that, and some people do that really well. Some actors do it well, and that's all great. But, in something like this, there is a certain realness that living a queer life brings to a queer character, because you don't use shorthand. You're just playing your truth of it, and acting is a lot about how you relate to a character. So you think, what would I do in this circumstance, and how do I do this? You have to make it real so that it becomes seems like it's a sort of innate reaction that you're having to whatever the scene is you're doing. And I think that's very complicated in that. And you can't just say only this and only that, but until there is a much more level playing field and more understanding, I think, of what it means for queer people to tell their own story, Black people to tell their own story, women to tell their own story, in the way they want to, I think until that is the case, then I think what Russell has done has been extremely important, not only because, as a final thing, I'll get off my soapbox, is that he has made it public and created discussion. And as we know, with all these things, it's so important that people talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. For anybody, if you haven't seen it, I hope it's still available on Catch Up, but do watch it. It's a Sin was absolutely fabulous. Some fantastic acting from especially some young people that I'd not seen before. It was really gripping. I think we watched the whole thing over 2 nights. But talking of telling stories, before we finish, and for listeners who don't know, what prompted your involvement with the Encephalitis Society? Just tell us a little bit about how and why you became involved.
I became involved with encephalitis because my friend Mark contracted it, and I'd never heard of it ever. I didn't even know the word, as I'm sure is the case for many people. And I did what everybody does these days, and you Google, and then you guys came up, and I couldn't believe you were down the road, in Yorkshire. It was amazing. And then, I felt sort of ridiculous, but because I was, when you are backed into a corner with something, you think I just got to pick up a phone and say, hello, I don't know anything about this. Can you help me? And then, of course, as anyone who has ever called the charity will know, you're then greeted with the most incredible empathy and understanding and information, and suddenly everything felt like it was going to be okay, and then as you may recall, it was the most horrific journey for Mark, and a sort of double dip with it, and just awful things, and he went to the brink but survived, which is in itself incredible. And but I was supported throughout by all of you, so it's we've come out the other side, and here we are 14 years later, as you say. Why?
No, right? 14 years, oh no. Anybody think we were getting old, Mathews?
Never. I refuse to.
Never, absolutely. Look, so what does the future hold for you now, Mathew? What's next in the life of Rajat M. Bose?
Well, Rajat M. Bose has just finished filming Midsummer Murders. So as a dodgy doctor, or is he? And hence the long hair, darlings.
Oh, okay.
And that's Raja, which has been great, and that's so nice. It's like having a whole other alter ego, which I'm loving. And for the first time in a long time, I'm playing not necessarily a nice character, very charming, but somebody who's potentially just a bit of a criminal. And I loved it. It was so great. It's such a fun show to be on. And I'm doing a play reading because theatres have opened. Yay! So I'm doing a play reading next week. Somebody I know has written a play, so I'm just going down to do a couple of days on that, which will be great. And then, but really, the rest of my life, those are the bits that sound glamorous. But the bit that's what I'll be really doing is just weeding my allotment, which is overgrown because I've not been anywhere near it. And that's not a euphemism, by the way, but I'll actually will be doing, that's what I'm going to do. And I have a feeling June, July is just going to run amok and nature's just going to reclaim it, frankly. So, but I shall be outlining it all on Operation Good Life, of course.
Well, I'm looking forward to coming over and seeing it in person. I could talk to you all day, of course, and we have done before.
Yes.
But before we finish, is there anything you'd like to say before we bring the podcast to a close?
I suppose just finish where we started, really, is that I think it's so important now for us all as we're climbing out of lockdowns and things to remember that we all have gone on a different journey for this and we've all processed it so differently. And I think I see increasingly people just being a bit sort of, well, you're being, anti-vaxxers or anti-this, anti-that, but it's a personal journey. We've got to process this in our own way. So we must be kind to each other, because the only way we're really going to get through this and move on and get this world back on its feet the way we should be and all be the best us is to just help each other, really, and just be kind and try to be understanding. And if you can't say anything nice, then just stomach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know that we've had offline conversations about this. So that's good advice, people. If you can't be anything else, be kind. We've covered an awful lot. We're deeply grateful to you, Mathew, for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you for asking me.
You're so welcome. We should do another one. We've covered so many things in there. I've got other podcasts now in my mind about it. But for those of you that are listening, the Encephalitis Society services, they remain unaffected. So if you need any support or information, our teams remain at your service. Go to encephalitis.info for contact details or to chat online with any of the team. And as always, if you can support our work at this really challenging time, then do please visit encephalitis.info/donate. Most of all, still keep washing your hands. Stick to the government guidelines whenever this podcast goes out. Get vaccinated if you can. And Mathew and I think we should finish this podcast in true It's a Sin style. 3, 2, 1. Love.